Okay, why don't we go ahead and begin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Loretta Heber-Girardet. I am from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. I am the chief of the branch on risk knowledge, but that also encompasses all of our work on climate change, data reporting, capacity building. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here today with a very distinguished panel, but also very distinguished keynote speakers as well. So maybe just to start off to say that each of the elements of this session, which is devoted to the question of enabling climate action through data, transparency, and finance, could have been a separate event in its own right. In fact, this was the original plan. And it was only once we knew through the UNFCCC that these different events were being organized that we got together and decided to create a unique and also very relevant event. It really is an opportunity to bring together stakeholders from a wider range of sectors and areas to explain the inter and intra-linkages of data transparency for enhanced climate action. And we are here today basking in the already historic, if we could say so, COP with the adoption of the decision on loss and damage funding arrangements and the fund. But still to come are some of the decisions that we are waiting for on some other critical areas, among which are the global goal on adaptation and the global stocktake. Next year, countries are also preparing for the inaugural biennial transparency reports. We call these the BTRs for short, to track progress on the Paris Agreement. And so this event, we believe, is very timely. I would like to start off today's event by inviting Her Excellency Ms. Tatiana Molchan, who's the UN Undersecretary General Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, for your opening remarks. Ms. Molchan has 20 years of experience in the public sector with extensive international cooperation and development background. And prior to assuming this role, she was the permanent representative of the Republic of Moldova to the United Nations Office, World Trade Organization, and other international organizations in Geneva. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Oh, it works. I was looking if it's the right one. Good day to everyone. I have to say that I'm really pleased to be today here, opening this event, because I totally agree with you. I think, it deserves a special, separate spotlight, I would put in the discussions that we are having, because already being for a couple of days here, I have noticed that in all the meetings, all the discussions, it's a topic that is brought everywhere into the discussion, but yet rarely gets attention on its own, and data for climate action. So it's not as a separate subject. We have to change this for the next COP 29 when it happens. And since this year we have the global stocktake, we cannot really overlook this fundamental issue any longer. We all talk about how urgent we need climate action. We know that we are still far away from the ambition, and we need to act fast and decisively, and leaving no one behind. Yet we don't know whether we have the best available data to inform that action. I strongly believe that we have to do more when it comes to a coordinated, systemic approach to climate change-related data and statistics to fit into the enhanced transparency framework and inform the global stocktake, but also inform decision-making at all levels, inform and empower our citizens, and enable new research and trigger best financing, because financing has been a key, again, into the discussion at this COP. And really, it's only high-quality data can reliably show us whether our actions are working and bringing us closer to our goals. There is a feeling that there is a lot of data out there, but is it the data we need? Is it the high-quality data produced using the same definitions, comparable, timely? Is it easily accessible to the policymakers, researchers, analysts, journalists, and citizens? And on the other hand, another key question is, are we making the full use of the data that is available? Because sometimes I think we feel that we are not doing that as well. So we have to really have this comprehensive, wide look at the data assets and gaps. And first of all, we need data about the relationship between the emissions and our economic activities, data about mitigation and adaptation actions, the effects on the economy and society, data on vulnerabilities to climate change, and how it already impacts us, causing loss and damage. How we can achieve this? You already have mentioned that, but cooperation, leveraging existing data system, and investment in statistical capacities. On the first aspect on cooperation, I already mentioned the need that we need to cooperate, but also to really to cover the gaps, but also to avoid duplications. I think this is even more scaring or duplication or overlappings than having the gaps sometimes. Data producers need to ensure that different types of data talk to each other, having a complete picture of climate change. Also, policymakers and researchers need to be aware of what data are already available and communicate the information needs to those who can produce data. On the second aspect is to leverage existing platforms and mechanisms. We have, as we see here, effective bodies for whom developing statistics and data is their everyday business. The United Nations Statistical Commission, regionally under each regional commission like the UNECE, and national, the statistical system. We must really use these platforms as efficient as possible, and we need to really invest as well and dedicate resources to produce reliable data. Because these days we talk a lot how to make climate financing. So we have to climate financing and data. I think we should add this one. It's important that we are not starting from scratch. We are quite advanced, I would say. And at UNECE, we have been working for at least 10 years on improving the usefulness of official statistics for climate change policy in close partnership with our commission, but also with the UN Statistics Division in New York and many other organizations. And some of the ideas that I just shared with you and some of the messages that I wanted to bring today is based on this work that we have already been carrying on. So I wish all of us good work and success in continuing what we are doing, but a little bit of additional effort and also in communicating better on what we are doing together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Mulcian, and I do hope that this session is part of our attempts to communicate a bit better on what we are doing collectively on data. It's now my pleasure to invite Professor Dr. Chongmeng Chen, who is the Vice Rector in Europe, the Director of the Institute for Environment and Human Security at the United Nations University. Professor Chongmeng is the Chief Academic and Administrative Officer of the Institute and oversees its direction, its organization and programs. Also an Honorary Professor for Culture of Sustainability at the Hochschule Bonn-Rhein-Sieg, while serving also on the management team of the World Adaptation Science Program. Thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind intro, Laurie. Very nice to see you here.
Nice to see you too. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency and colleagues. It is really a pleasure for me to be here today because today's themes, as my previous speaker has already said, will somehow be discussed in every room in this venue and every day at this conference. While reflecting its significance, the frequency of its use does risk on the edge of becoming a mere buzzword without translating into tangible actions. The call for data, transparency, and finance, however, serves as a crucial catalyst for innovation. Amidst ongoing improvements, we find ourselves at a thrilling juncture in history. Technology, especially for those in lower income regions, presents unprecedented opportunities for climate action. Despite persistent challenges in many countries' data infrastructure, advancements in AI, machine learning, and Earth observations are improving data accessibility, quality, consistency, and reducing the pressure on local resources. While locally collected data remains crucial, global investment in open source technological platforms greatly enhance analytics and monitoring capabilities in developing countries. This, in turn, can leverage climate finance, a crucial aspect in the ongoing discussions on loss and damage. A good example of data limiting climate action is impact disaster records. Even though there are important efforts in place, including the famous MDAT and platforms like Death Inventar and the new loss and damage tracking system from UNDRR, UNDP, and WMO, high-quality data is still scarce and affects the accuracy of assessment and predictive models. A recent study from our own institute, United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security, we compared the impacts of floods included in MDAT in Nepal and Mexico between 2011 and 2015 with those reported in local media and accessible through the Google search engine. The algorithm developed selected specific keywords using text data mining and AI and filtered geographical locations, the time and date, and location range. In the case of Mexico, the algorithm found nearly 30 times more events taking place during the study period than those reported by big database like MDAT, and nearly 3 times more than the local service. Similarly, the total number of affected people reported was almost 10-fold according to the code compared to MDAT, and 6-fold to local service. Economic impacts were also much higher based on the results of the algorithm. One important finding from this study was that relatively small disasters are very often overlooked in public reporting, including in MDAT. But their higher frequency translates into larger aggregated losses than those caused by more extreme events. In this context, the enhanced transparency framework plays an important role in closing the leaks of the data pipes. While the framework provides flexibility and guidance, it supports countries in transparently reporting their efforts in dealing with climate change and contributes to increased data availability. To summarize, there are many challenges in climate and disaster data collection, but the use of analytics and AI, international cross-sectoral collaboration, and the enhanced transparency framework provide new possibilities for increasing data availability and enhanced decision-making. By using new approaches and technology to gather, share, and process data, we can enhance disaster transparency, unlock climate finance, and also pave the way to climate action. I do hope that this session today can contribute to all of the above, and I wish you all a vivid discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting what is really a gap in our data system, that is high-frequency, low-intensity events that we're not capturing, so we're not able to really tell the full story of the impacts of climate change in countries. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to invite Mr. Oleg Bulanyi, who is the Senior Program Officer from ICAT UNOPS, for brief remarks. Mr. Bulanyi coordinates the development and implementation of ICAT strategies and regional and country projects, and prior to ICAT, he managed climate finance accounting and reporting at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm really glad to be here with you and to discuss this quite technical issue of using data and transparency for enabling climate action. One of the key points of the scope is a global stocktake, and that was touched upon by the previous speakers. That key findings of that global stocktake tell us that we are not on the way to reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. We're quite far away from that. And recognizing this issue, we hear more and more about new pledges, new commitments, many private sector actors and governments putting ahead national strategies and declaring that they will become carbon neutral in 2050 or 2060. However, these two messages sounds a bit contradicting, right? So to me, it sounds like a big implementation gap between national strategies, pledges and commitment, and between actions on the ground. And to close that gap, there are many ways and many means that could help to close that gap. One of them is transparency. And transparency framework is a backbone of Paris Agreement. And it can help really to close this gap by bringing together the data, the internationally recognized methodologies, and to engage stakeholders. However, another issue that many practitioners in the country and many people consider this enhanced transparency framework as a merely reporting tool. And that's the fundamental error, because to put so much effort into bring together different branches of the government, different ministries to collect the data, to apply the IPCC methodology for inventories, to select the indicators for policy assessment and measures, and then to use it only for reporting, it's useful for international community, but it's not super useful for countries to move forward to achieving their goals. So if those efforts into putting enhanced transparency framework would be also used to design the policies, to inform the policymakers, it could become quite useful dashboard or control panel for the government, so they would see where they are at any point in time in implementing their policies and action, and they could also apply the correction actions where it's needed and mobilize climate finance by informing the international financial institutions about the impact of proposed actions, which is very important for MDBs and GCF and other climate investment funds. So to summarize, we shouldn't see the reporting to UNFCCC as a burden. It's just a tool, it's just a mean, and it could have many different useful applications, and one of them is to enable climate action on the ground. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the points you make are so relevant, because we at UNDRR often find that the Sendai framework reporting is seen only as a reporting tool, and the data isn't being used sufficiently to actually help inform some of the policy making. So I think it's a similar issue. I would like to thank all of our three speakers for their opening statements. I think you've done a great job of setting the foundation. It is now my great pleasure, before we move to our panelists, to launch a publication that UNDRR has been working on called Closing Climate and Disaster Data Gaps, New Challenges, New Thinking. We know that there is a level of confidence that we now have in understanding the effects of climate change, and this is only possible because of the investments that have taken place so far in data. And that's why the event today is really giving pride of place to data. It is the foundation of everything that we do. However, for data to be most effective in building resilience and reducing vulnerability, it needs to be available, accessible. We heard this morning, it needs to be of high quality. But there are gaps in data, and this has implications for the extent by which we're able to actually act upon the data to inform climate action. We know that risk knowledge is crucial. However, we have just seen, we've launched just 2 days ago, the Global Status Report on Early Warning Systems, that this is an area that still has significant gaps. In fact, it is the area of early warning that has the highest number of gaps. It is the most under-resourced area. And this, of course, has implications because that means that countries are not necessarily having the data they need to identify the hotspots, to identify which populations are most at risk for disasters. In today's event, we're very happy then to launch our recent analysis on climate and disaster data gaps. And we have been working with academic partners and others to focus on 4 specific hazards: heat waves, wildfires, storms, and flooding. And these are among the priority hazards that have been identified by the UN Secretary General's call to action on early warnings for all. And the report has been examining 2 key questions. How do we improve the data collection and capture the impacts of unreported or underreported events, including the smaller but persistent localized disasters? And we heard about this morning. And do we have the right data? This was also a comment that was made just now on losses and damages that can support appropriate DRR and adaptation actions. The report examines significant and very specific gaps in long-running disaster impact data sets, which skews our knowledge about global patterns and trends. Such data deficiency distorts our perception of risks of climate change and confounds analysis with its full impacts. So the report makes some recommendations, and that includes to collect comprehensive, standardized, peer-reviewed, validated data as near as possible to the time and place of climate-related disasters, and to do a better job of applying data standards, for example, hazard classification and typologies, to ensure consistent recordings of event type and subtypes. And this will enable greater granularity of analysis, both in terms of cause and also impact. And a final recommendation is to support data analysis and knowledge brokery. And this way, policymakers and practitioners, but also those who are at risk of disasters and most affected, could have really access to meaningful and useful information for action. The findings and recommendations of this report will inform the development of a new tracking system for hazardous events and disaster losses and damages. This is something we've been working on with the World Meteorological Organization and the UNDP, but will also support better reporting through the Sendai Framework Monitoring System. So the report is now launched. Please use the QR code here that's being shown on the screen to access the report. So that took a little bit of time, but we are proud of this analysis, and we do want to share it with you because we feel it's critical for the future. So we are now going to move to the panel discussion, but before we do so, we are going to use a bit of technology, the Mentimeter, and this is an opportunity to hear a little bit more your reflections and your views. We have got a first question for you that we're going to put on the screen. And that question is coming up in one moment. There you go. So there is the QR code. The question we'd like you to answer when you get there is, what is the main challenge in implementing the enhanced transparency framework in your country? And if you're not representing a country, maybe just look from your own perspective. So please do scan the QR code or use the code shown on the screen here and tell us, what do you think is the challenge of the enhanced transparency framework? We'll come back to this at the end of the panel discussion. There you go. Great. So let's begin our panel discussion. And we will start with Dr. Lennox Gladden, who is the Chief Climate Change Officer, the National Climate Change Office, the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Climate Change, and Disaster Risk Management from Belize. Dr. Gladden's work at the Climate Change Office encompasses 3 main roles: coordinate, communicate, and mainstream all climate change-related activities nationally. So kind of a small job, right? So you're an engineer by training. Previous work focused on water resource management. And you will be giving us the perspective of a developing country, but that's also a SIDS from the Caribbean. So very much on the front line of the climate emergency. We know that data is critical in assessing the effectiveness of climate action. And as part of an ICAT project, Belize is developing its climate finance tracking framework addressing both international and domestic public finance. And this goal relies on being able to establish an effective framework for data collections in the first place. So considering the lessons learned from Belize's experience, what are the challenges that you're seeing in establishing institutional arrangements for climate finance tracking, and what are some of the innovative ways that you're finding to address them?
Yes, thanks, and of course appreciation for being able to impart our national circumstance as it relates to transparency and especially tracking of climate finance. I think that one of the main challenges that we face in this process was that level of sensitization. For the most part, a lot of the practitioners that collect data sets or even analyze data to translate that to information, they're not familiar with any sort of reporting obligation, right? That isn't the end goal for them. They're utilizing the data sets for policy formulation, for evidence-based decision making. So from the onset, that capacity needs to be built in them for them to have a better understanding as it relates to what does climate finance mean, right? So the first step was to ensure that we have one definition nationally for climate finance, right? And once we managed to overcome that hurdle, then we're now getting into the dashboard, as Oleg mentioned earlier. So everybody would then be able to account for their flows within their respective sectors. So that is something that we try to, as much as possible, to overcome as a major challenge. It was just the nomenclature at the onset that needed to be ironed out for them to get a deeper appreciation. It is beyond just a reporting obligation, but it was required for their day-to-day activities within their respective priority sectors.
Thank you very much for that example from your country. Our second panelist is Mr. Otto Sverts, who is the chair of the UNECE task force on the role of national statistical offices in achieving national climate objectives, and also the head of energy statistics in your home country of the Netherlands. Now, you are working in a national statistics office, but you're also representing the UNECE task force. Statistical offices, we know, have a special role in national data ecosystems. But climate change has a particularly complex data landscape where many institutions are involved. So I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about the role of National Statistics Office and the statistical community more broadly, and how they are producing the data for climate action, and also what are the challenges that you're seeing, and what can we do better to fully use the statistics and data that are already available so that we can address the data gaps.
Yes, thank you. Well, nice to see you all, also online. I'll go to your question. We're all here in Dubai to talk about climate change, and this is a societal topic. And national statistical offices, where I work and which I represent, produce and publish data on these topics. So we serve the governments, actors, and the public with data, official statistics, and services related to data. So we're guided by so-called fundamental principles of official statistics. And these require that our data are, among others, relevant, impartial, and according to international standards. And nationally, we have a mandate in all countries maybe for data collection, for data safeguarding, and for publishing as well. So we've been producing statistics on topics for decades. Economy, society, and climate change is a challenging topic because, as former speaker said, and everybody says, and everybody realizes when you walk around here, it's so complex and it touches on many areas of life. So on the one hand, which also makes it complicated, that there's a lot of questions from data users coming from policy. And on the other hand, we have already a lot of data available, and we might tweak them a little bit to make them more useful for use in this landscape. So the reason why our task was started and that's what your question was about, is one of the principles is striving for international comparability. That's the main task of statistical offices in the work. So we think collectively how to solve problems, and we learn from each other. And we already have a network all over the world where people come together and talk about these things. And therefore we formed this group, a task force under UNECE, and we've been trying to describe the role of NSOs around climate change. So what we already can offer and what would be new tasks. So I'm going to a couple of things. First, NSOs have a clear role in the enhanced transparency framework, which has been mentioned many times. At the minimum, NSOs, I always make it shorter, National Statistical Offices to NSOs. So we are responsible for producing a significant share of data already used in this world. It's about statistics on energy, agriculture, etc. But ideally, the NSO should be actively involved. So in the questions that are the data that are needed, and that would bring up a communication and bring this would bring better data available, and that's transparency in fact, because that's what the word transparency is about. All right, and then of course, and I go to the next slide now. That's here, so it says next. Thank you. So you can see here topics that we are working on in this guidance. So this is in fact the outline of the guidance. And there's already a lot of examples, for example, on energy transition. There's a lot of data available. But it's not only about mitigation, but it's also about the other enablers. So just as available infrastructure, green jobs, critical raw materials, perceptions, behaviors. For adaptation, NSOs have very good data on very vulnerable populations and housing and infrastructure, because NSOs are have a generation task data on socio-economic data. And of course then just transition, because just transition is today's theme. NSOs are very good in linking environmental or economic data with social data. So we can give insights and policy effects on vulnerable groups. For example, energy poverty and education and skills of the workforce within the transition. So, and then third, that's informing the public. And informing the public is in the core of the mandate of NSOs, because everything a statistical office produces is being published. So data are easily available for media, analysts, researchers, and of course the citizens. And all groups equally have the right to know and make informed decisions based on impartial data. And again, in fact, that's what transparency is about. So, the conclusion of the guidance is that we already have many tools and frameworks in place. For example, I was looking if it's on the slide. There's a global set of climate change related statistics and indicators, and you can use it. And probably statisticians in your countries will use these data already in these indicators. But our vision is that climate data are just as normal as population, GDP or unemployment. But to get there, users, maybe you, ideally engage with statisticians. Producing helpful data is a process of cooperation. It ends with the figure of table, but it always starts with a user need. And the sooner we start what you need, the sooner we can act on it. And which is transparency in action. So thank you for your attention, and you can find the documents behind the QR codes.
Thank you very much. I mean, you really demonstrate through your slide how the statistics and data are the foundation of the entire spread of activities related to climate action. And I hope we have time to come back a little bit in the discussion to talk about how we can strengthen a bit the statistical capacities of NSOs in the country. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Mr. Marcos Concepcion Raba, who's the Executive Director of the Global Network of Civil Society Organizations for Disaster Reduction, that's GNDR, an old friend of UNDRR's. And you're going to be bringing the perspective of the local level, the community level. You are an experienced senior executive with more than 20 years in strategic and tactical planning, organization building, and you've worked with grassroots organizations in Brazil to support, among others, the rights of indigenous people. And that's really quite interesting for us because we are working to see how can we bring more indigenous knowledge, for example, to risk knowledge. Now, civil society represents the most vulnerable and gives a voice to issues that are being experienced. Now, can you share a little bit on how data challenges affect the level of climate resilience at the community level? And also how CSO stakeholders can or are contributing to better data collection and management? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Loretta, and thank you for having us and for organizing this event. Yeah, GNDR, as you said, we are the largest civil society organizations, the largest network of civil society organizations, and we make an effort to contribute to data collection. Of course, we have this beautiful project, Views from the Front Line, which is an assessment in the communities from the civil society perspective about the risks that are affecting and impacting their own communities. And it is a huge effort in 50 countries, more than 700 communities, more than 1,020 interviews. One of the outcomes of that, unfortunately, is that communities say that 84% of them don't have access to data, which is really bad. It's really ugly. So, because we know, I mean, the idea of that generating that data is to drive action, and if communities don't have access to that, they are not going to be able to, not just to react, but also to plan accordingly to make sure that they can protect themselves. So that's the dark side of it. Let's put it that way. But of course, in the bright side, we are also making an effort. Our members, communities, are also are making an effort in making sure that they can contribute to the effort of collecting data and getting to know much better what is the reality that is about to impact them, what is about the next crisis that is going to affect them. So communities, they know logically that there is that local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, is challenged as well by climate change. So they are open to keep contributing and to know, to engage with science to make sure that we can work together on adapting to the new situation and to make sure that data can enable proper action. So we have also this beautiful project which is called Localizing Climate Projections. And I wanted to highlight that because it's also a huge effort, making sure that indigenous and local knowledge engage with scientific and academic knowledge. We published at the beginning of this year the Localizing Climate Projections Guide and Toolkit. Of course, it is in our website. The idea is to make sure that local actors can lead climate risk and the climate risk narrative process as well. So this guide is a practical advice on how to ensure local actors are part of the climate change projection processes. There are 6 simple stages to follow to make sure that communities and local actors are engaged. We implemented this project, we piloted this project in Niger, in Bangladesh, in different countries, to make sure that the model itself works. Logically, the first step is about engaging communities in climate projections, mapping and identifying the local knowledge, collaborate with local stakeholders. It's not just the communities themselves, it's engaging with local authorities, it's engaging with the rest of the stakeholders in the local area, the region, and mapping the ecosystem information they have. What I mean is trying to recover that traditional knowledge, but opening to the local knowledge in the same community, in the same region, and try to prioritize those risks from there. That's the MES mapping. Then, and this is a very interesting exercise, we always try to bring the university researchers to make sure that we can work together with the scientific data, with the traditional knowledge. We can work together in climate risk narratives. So these workshops are beautiful, and it's really amazing to see how big people from the city, those from the Met offices come to engage with the communities and make sure that they can understand each other and they can share that knowledge. And at the end, logically, is consolidate together decisions to plan next steps, engaging local authorities as well, or national authorities. So all this effort has to end on the disaster risk reduction local, national plan, of course. But what I mean is like, yeah, there is the option of localizing climate data and projections to build resilience from there, but it has to be done with the communities, of course.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing that experience with us. And that statistic is going to stick with me for a long time. 84% of communities feel like they do not have access to quality data. I mean, that for me really represents an area of focus for all of us to make sure that we can support the types of initiatives that you've just described to us. So thank you for sharing that. I would now like to go to Bert Kruschi, who is the Chief Statistician, Data Officer, and Director of the Statistics Department from the International Monetary Fund, to bring perspectives from a major global financial institution. Before joining the IMF, Mr. Kruschi worked for 25 years in statistics in the Netherlands also, in various expert and management roles in the fields of methodology and economic statistics. So the IMF's work focuses on ensuring global financial stability and achieving sustainable growth and prosperity for its member countries. Why are climate change and climate change-related data so important for you and the financial sector more broadly? And what are the data gaps that you are experiencing and observing from this perspective, and what is being done to address them?
Thanks, Loretta, for inviting me here and posing that question. It's not easy to answer that in 5 minutes, but I'll try to give a grasp. The mandate of the IMF, as you say, is to ensure financial stability and sustainable economic growth in the world. So going from local to basic to the world. And it's clear that climate change is a threat to both. Raising temperatures is a threat for agriculture, for productivity. Floods, wildfires, cyclones, they all have impact on the economy and financial stability. So climate change is inherent and core to the mandate and the role of the IMF. And as has been said before, you cannot really do good policies without having data, especially not the IMF. There's a quote from our managing director, Kristalina, which basically say to develop the right policy measures to tackle climate change, governance need robust and comparable data. And that's the role of the department that I'm leading at the IMF. So what data is there and what data is missing? And this is data about the relation between the economy and climate, because that's core to the IMF. And well, this was mentioned by the Undersecretary also. This is important because many policy measures are not just about the economy, they're not just about the environment, they have effects on both, so you need data that integrate both. What we did is bring together all relevant data that we could find, partly data that we did a lot of calculations on ourselves, like quarterly greenhouse gas emissions for regions and the world, partly data that we just got from other institutions, like the pathways, the transition pathways of the network of greening financial system, and partly data that we got from countries. And this is a useful database that supports the work not only of the IMF, but also of the countries. The work of the IMF, by the way, consists of surveillance. We go to countries, we analyze the economy, we give policy advice how to deal with climate change, but also digitalization, the pandemic. And we just introduced last year a big lending facility for countries. 11 countries already participate, have loans. This is paid for long-term sustainable finance in the sense that they strengthen the institutions, the information knowledge, the legislation, etc., to be more resilient for these big changes. So we identified 3 reasons why data are missing that we need. And the first reason is in cases where there is methodology, we know what to do, the data is there, but it's not done because of capacity, probably, and most likely. And the case is air emission accounts, energy accounts. There's methodology where you link the economy to the emissions. It has been adopted by the United Nations unanimously by all countries in the world. We know how to do it. The data is there for a large part. It just costs capacity, and at the moment 50 countries are producing that in the world. It's useful information because you need that kind of information to really see the effects of taxes on carbon taxes, etc. Economic models that run both carbon prices and well, the economic sectors themselves. And well, that's one reason this kind of data is missing while it is needed. And it's not needed only by the IMF, but also by countries. I come back to that later. The second reason that data are missing is that classifications are missing. There's data on subsidies, there's data on expenditures by governments, there's data on green finance and green bonds, but they're not harmonized. So for example, on our climate dashboard we have green bonds, as you can see, but these are basically self-reported by countries. And that means they're not completely comparable. While if you have international policies, it's good to have international comparable data, joint classifications. The same things for subsidies and expenditure. What basically you want to do is to see what money is spent, how is it financed, so is it who finances these expenditures, and what are the effects? And you want to do that in an international comparable way. And well, lacking international comparable classification is one of the reasons that there's still a policy issue here. And the third reason is sometimes we don't exactly know what we want to measure or to calculate. Methodology is missing. There's a lot of interest now in risks, in forward-looking risks. Where are the hazards? What's the hazards to the economy, to the financial sector? Structures being endangered by floods and cyclones. What does it mean for the insurance sector, for the banks, for the credit risks? But how you exactly do these indicators, it has to be decided. So what do? And we is not the IMF, because I completely agree with everyone who said that we need to do things in cooperation between international organizations, national organizations, central banks, academia, private world, and nothing we do alone, because you cannot be successful in that way. Basically, we do 4 things. First, we work on international statistical standards. And these are the 2 left parts of this slide. 11 years ago, we adopted the system of environmental economic accounting. This is basically the framework that links emissions and use of natural resources to the economy, unanimously approved by the whole United Nations, that means all countries in the world. It's the base of air emission accounts, energy accounts, Next year we will start some kind of a revision, try to update it with newest insights. The system of national accounts is the basis of GDP and economic growth. It will be revised in 2025. And what we're trying to do, but the decision has to be taken in 2025, is to incorporate much more environmental and climate change aspects. For example, renewable energy assets will be part of the asset boundary, which can change, probably will change the wealth distribution over countries, because now only the non-renewable energy assets are part of the asset boundary. There will also be much more information about carbon revenues, about specific climate disaggregations of subsidies, expenditure, and green finance. So this will lead to much more harmonized information. But again, it has to be approved in 2025, and then the data has to be done. Also, other manuals will be approved. So one stream of work that we do, together with many others, is to work on these international statistical standards that are the basis of our national and international statistics. The second part is that last year in Bali, the Ministers of Finance and the Central Bank Governors of the G20 asked the IMF to lead an initiative. Also a data gaps initiative, focuses on 14 recommendations, 14 gaps that they identify as missing for their policies, data that they need to do better their work. 7 of them are on climate, 2 on inequality, wealth and income, 3 of them on digital fintech type of things like digital money, financial inclusion. On the 7 on climate, there are basically things on emissions, on climate risk, green finance, on subsidies expenditure, and we're working together. And we, as the IMF, with the World Bank, the UN, the OECD, the ECB, the BIS, Eurostat, and I'll probably forget some, and all these 20 economies to really develop the methodology, the data to fill these gaps. And this is quite exciting because this is really a worldwide effort to try to take away this standardization and also the lack of data while the methodology is there. Every year there's a big conference, hopefully this year, next year it will be in Brazil, last year in DC. And we try to measure progress there and report to the Minister of Finance and to their governors every year. Third thing we do is capacity development. At present we're working in 7 countries, paid by the Swiss Ministry of Economic Affairs. We basically help them to make the data they need. Well, you see the blue countries on the map. These are data that will basically asked by their authorities to make better policy driven by the country experience. And the fourth thing is we need innovation. We need to work together with academia. The good thing is there are many events on data in COP this time. I really see that data is taking up on climate. It's good to see. We've been to a number of space data, remote sensing data, satellite data events. And you see that there's a lot to gain there to use that data for emissions, for risks, and while working together with the international academia, with the private world, with ESA, with other institutions like that, will really help us to get better data and also to help the countries better by that. I'm not sure I stick to the 5 minutes,
That's
but
fine.
I said a lot, I think, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists for their remarks. I mean, I think we had a really good overview of the work that's going on at the global level, the local level, the national level, this shared understanding of the importance of data, the importance of improving the quality, the accessibility, and above all, the use of the data to inform policy and decision making. We now have a bit of time to again go back to the Mentimeter and to get some of your reactions. We're going to ask a few more questions and then we're going to open the floor for some questions and further discussion. So this time, what we'd like you to reflect on is a little bit of what you've actually heard, but also your own background and your own experience. And then we will go through all of the questions afterwards. So this question now is, from your knowledge and from your experience, what is the main challenge that you see for sustainable data collection that can inform climate action? So that is the first question that we're asking you to reflect on, and we'll see if we have a consensus in the room or whether we have very diverse opinions about what we think the main challenge is. And I'll let you know in advance right now that there's a second question, but let's just look at this one right now. Resource constraints, accessibility, cooperation. Social sciences. Okay. Data awareness, this was something that was mentioned by our panelists. Politicization, that's interesting. That might be worth talking about a bit. What are the politics behind data? Okay, we'll give it another minute, and then I'm going to ask you a second question, then we're going to go back through some of the questions, through all three of the questions that were asked. Still have more answers coming in. Interesting. I see data awareness is emerging as perhaps an issue that several of you agree on. Okay. Why don't we go now to the second question? What are the main ways in which data and transparency can boost climate finance, including for addressing loss and damage at the national or subnational level? So please reflect on this. What are some of the ways in which data and transparency can boost climate finance? Accountability. I think we have time. I think we have time. Okay, lots of great answers. I think we have time for one more question, and actually this is a question that interests me. I'm really eager to hear your responses to it. What technological innovation has the most potential for boosting transparency on data and the implementation of the ETF? Okay. What is the technological innovation? Earth observation, okay. So the enhanced transparency framework, how will that be boosted by innovations? AI, yes, okay. Chain technology. Lots of great ideas. Okay, great. So thanks. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go over some of your responses and ask our panelists to comment on them. And we're going to go back to the very first question that we asked on the Mentimeter, which is, what do you see are the main challenges in implementing the enhanced transparency framework in your country? And there seems to be quite a lot of challenges which have been identified. Knowledge, commitment, lobbying. Wow, many different answers. Why don't I start with Dr. Gladden? Any reflection on the myriad of challenges that have been presented here in implementing the enhanced transparency framework, and any recommendations on how to address any of these?
Yes, I look at the laundry list of recommendations and challenges, and I just chalk it up to governance, right? I think in the absence of good governance, it becomes very problematic to overcome these challenges. Most of these challenges are part and parcel linked to governance, because you also have to make mention of the political dynamics, the stakeholder pressures highlighted here, and of course the quality and the lack of knowledge or data sharing agreements, or the absence thereof. And this also ties into what my colleague mentioned earlier about indigenous knowledge, local knowledge. So when we speak about governance along the lines of the ETF, once you can develop and maintain a good governance structure, it takes into consideration inputs from not only state but non-state actors. So I would say that governance would be a way forward in order to overcome the challenge of implementing the ETF.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, we're always pushing for better risk governance, climate governance. I couldn't agree with you more. Would any of the other panelists like to reflect on any of the comments that you're seeing here? Political commitment, political pushback. Anything that strikes you that you'd like to add any comments on or recommendations on how to address? Yes, please, go ahead.
Well, what's interesting, I look at the governance, of course, you should have governance, that's very relevant. And then should goals, that's very relevant, because otherwise there's no way where to go to. But then I come, Marcus, to your local actors. And what we did in my country, there was a national translation of the climate agreement, and there were local goals, and then we started a program to cooperation. So we have a program governed by the ministry, and they sponsored it. So we talk with all local municipalities, with a couple of other organizations on data, what data they need. And to my surprise, they always come with different questions than I had imagined. And that's very interesting. And for example, last week, it was a week ago, we had a meeting of this group, and there were 170 people, of which I think 50 or 60 municipalities, which was brilliant, because this is really the talk you have. And so those local networks, that's where it starts. And that's where, I would say, cooperation, but yeah, that's...
Really engaging with communities.
And engaging with communities.
And understanding what their needs are. Well, thank you very much. Why don't we go to the second question now? And here the question was, from your knowledge and experience, what is the main challenge for sustainable data collection that can inform climate action? I see data awareness emerges quite high, but so does cooperation. And I'm wondering, maybe this time we could start with Berta. Krutschid, any reflections on what you're seeing here? And then I'd also like to ask other colleagues to answer.
Yeah, I don't see, I see capacity here. What we at the IMF, we work with all countries in the world, and what we see is that many countries do not have enough capacity to really make statistical infrastructure, and statistics and data are not free.
Yes.
So if we all say we need good data to derive the right policy and to have the data for to inform climate action, we should also invest in it. And that's one thing. Luckily, you see capacity here. The other thing is cooperation. There's so much going on. If you walk around the COP here, there's so many initiatives, and also we learned so much already today. We had a meeting with ESA this morning, and so cooperation, really trying to find what's really needed for the policymakers to do their job, what's really the possibility in the new technologies, the innovations, and what we statisticians can do to meet the goals using the techniques that are there. This is a major thing that we should work on.
Thank you very much. And may I ask Marcos, Raba, if you could follow up on this. There are a lot of projects happening, a lot of databases. I just know in the UN system that we are investing a lot in this. But is it reaching the local areas? It doesn't seem from the statistic that you shared with us that that's the case. So what do we need to do better?
I think that, as Linux said, I mean, it's just a matter of making sure that we assume this kind of whole of society approach and governance that there are many, as you said, many databases and information around, and we are contributing to many of them. A member of us in Mali, you know, the pastoralists, they have their own very old-fashioned mobile phones, but they take some information about the weather, and then when they are visited by our member, the local NGO, they get that data, and when they find finally internet, they are able to upload that to the database. In that case, it is connected with the national system, but sometimes it's not, and so we cannot use it. I mean, in general, as said before, you know, locals, they don't have access to that data. They don't understand that data. So I think that cooperation is a big challenge. If we cooperate, not just to generate that data, to collect that data, but also in terms of we need to cooperate in terms of in making that data useful and you know, and relevant for everybody. Yeah, I think that cooperation and the governance of that kind of system is important.
And maybe just to say that we talk about data, but data must be turned into information and then turned into knowledge to be usable. And I'm wondering if sometimes this isn't where the chain breaks down a little bit. We collect data, but how actually is this translating into usable information and knowledge? Okay, well, thank you for that. Why don't we go on to the next question? And that is, what are the main ways in which data and transparency can boost climate finance, including for addressing loss and damage? And of course, this is the big issue here at this COP. The Loss and Damage Fund is now going to be available. So it might be interesting if you have any reflections on this at the national, but also the subnational level. And of course, we know the fund will also be accessible to populations at the subnational level. So interestingly enough, accountability is coming up very strongly. I don't know, Lennox, if you'd like to reflect on this at all, accountability.
Yes, that is definitely a big thing. And accountability, as in my previous intervention, the accountability isn't only for the MDBs, IFIs. The accountability is also for the respective constituencies, especially when we're looking at any sort of implementation action on the ground. The various constituencies, they would like to know if the investment, if it's a sound investment, if the resources are being utilized properly, and to avoid as much as possible the misuse of the flows, because we understand that the resources being mobilized, be it technical or financial, it is finite. Right? So that accountability is not only interministerial, interstate, but for the respective constituencies and for the respective sectors as well. So accountability, and the accountability even in relation to some of the gaps that might come about as a result of the process, it is key, right, moving forward along this trajectory.
Thank you very much. And I'm wondering if we could ask Mr. Gurchi from the IMF's perspective, how do you see accountability as really coming out quite strongly as the main way in which data and transparency can boost climate finance? What does that mean for a large organization, institutions such as your own?
Yeah, I don't think I've got much to add to what Lennon said. I mean, you need this transparency to be able to ensure that funds are used well. So I don't have any very bright extra insights to that, sorry.
Any of the other comments that you see here that strike you as relevant for the question?
I think it is important. Evidence, I mean, generating the evidence. Data can help us a lot in making sure that we've got that evidence to invest properly on loss and damage. I think that is there's a huge effort. And again, accountability, for sure. Accountability not just for investors, not just for donors, accountability to communities as well. For me, that's key, and data can help a lot in that sense.
So it's really across the entire spectrum. Well, let's go to our last question then, and that is around the technological innovation that has the most potential for boosting transparency and the implementation also of the ETF. And here we are seeing artificial intelligence, remote sensing, Earth observation. Maybe we'd start by asking our panelists, what are the technological innovations that you are using that you think will really be game changers for the work that you're doing? And perhaps I could go to you, Otto, to start on that, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's an interesting question. To be honest, I filled in the internet because I thought that's very relevant because to get to the data. I was thinking of it later that it's more about that, but if we look at my own work, data, it's still the things like open access databases, the computer. You need to have data, you need good quality data, and there's not so much technological innovation, is my feeling. And then, of course, we have AI, and AI is a difficult thing. How does it work? My colleagues said sometimes jokingly, if you use AI on the internet, it just uses the data there are. And who brings the data which are on the internet? Those are people who have to bring data on the internet. So that's where it starts. So I would say collect good data, that's the basis for all. And I could give an example, but maybe I'll save it for later.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please, sir.
Yeah, I think Earth observation AI are one of the most very promising that can do here. I agree with Otto that AI uses data there is, but you can train AI to use your own data. For example, you said data are there, but how are we going to ensure that people are using them? And AI, especially large language models, can be used well to find in your own natural language the data that are there. You can develop, and we're doing that actually at the IMF, your own ChatGPT on their own data. So it doesn't look on the internet, it just looks in your own data. So you can much easier find and make visualizations of your own data. So that would make data much more accessible and hence used much more. And the also foundation data, these are revolutionary. We heard about, I was told about the Al Gore thing with the emission data estimated for all countries using AI and Earth observation data. These developments are going so fast. And we're working together with a number of Earth observation institutions and really feel that for emissions, but also forward-looking risks, these are game changers and really lead to good global data that can be added to by national authorities, of course, but they are a really good start already.
May I ask a question to all of you? How do we ensure that all countries in the world benefit from these innovations? Because we see with our work on early warnings for all that it is the most vulnerable, the most fragile countries that really risk being left behind. How do we bring AI, Earth observations, and all of these innovations down to those communities that really are most at risk? Any thoughts or examples would be great.
Yeah, well, if I can go again, on Earth observation, that's being done. Yesterday we had an event on the Basque Center of Computing, and they're making something called areas. And this is open Earth observation data with AI models that basically can be used by anyone to make all kind of ecosystem modeling for their own area that they want to use. The ESA seminar we had this morning, they're also making something available to the whole world. And we can do it together with the World on capacity development to train countries to use that. And it might not be perfect, but it's a great start already. And for countries that do not have data, they can use that for physical risk indicators, for emissions, and they can build on with additional databases. So having these global data sets, these global approaches, will be a great start for countries that do not have data, and then it should be added to by capacity development. And there's a great interest in that.
Great. And maybe, can I ask you, Marcos, resource-constrained environments, is AI going to be a solution to even the ante somewhat?
Hopefully, I mean, hopefully, I mean, what can I say? I do agree. I mean, there are many technologies and powerful technologies out there. As you can imagine, our main concern is how to access to that, and how to make that useful for the local level. And I'm I'm not just talking about local communities or local organizations. I'm talking about the local level. How make sure that not just the national level has access to that in many cases they have. How to make sure that that is provided to the local level. We know that to really be effective, we need to reach the local level, and local authorities, well coordinated with other stakeholders at local level, are going to make a difference. So, yeah, I see that that's probably the main challenge. When I saw over there computer, internet, that's really a challenge for many stakeholders at local level. So, yeah, for me, that's a big challenge.
Any other comments on this issue?
I think getting the message out, for example, Geo, looking at their whole initiative that they're pushing for, it's just, they're doing amazing works that I've just recently become familiar with, and this is beyond the early warning for all initiative. And of course, most of their facilities or tools, it's open source. And that flattens the process tremendously, because we don't have to then do the model all over again. It is already there. But again, that level of awareness. If they could have a Geo Week every other week, I think that would be splendid, because that would definitely get the message out. Sadly, that's not the case. But the work that they're doing exceptional work. It's just keeping up the momentum to share with stakeholders, beneficiaries of what is actually out there, because there is a lot of good work being done under that umbrella.
Thank you. It's really great to hear. They're a great partner of ours as well, and a strong member of Pillar 1 for Early Warnings for All. Anything from you? Otherwise, we're going to... No? Okay. So we have just a few minutes left in case there are any burning questions from the floor. I think we have really covered a lot of ground, the importance of data, but also the great innovations that are occurring. Yes, please introduce yourself as well. Not great. Maybe turn it up a bit, yeah.
Hello. Okay, thank you very much. That was extremely informative. My name is Gordon Rattray. I work for the European Disability Forum. I have a question regarding data, but population data and engagement of local populations. I remember the Sendai framework was adopted in 2015. I remember being part of the process towards the development of indicators in 2016, and one of the comments from people talking about statistics was that the Sendai demand for data disaggregated by gender, age and disability was too much. Gender and age might be possible, but disability was going a step too far at that point. And we've seen in the midterm review of the Sendai framework that this is the case, that disability data is not coming forward. One of the blockages, one of the barriers, is that engagement of especially local organizations of persons with disabilities, is not easy, because these organizations themselves are full-time busy in their everyday advocacy work, and they don't have the time and the money to participate in these opportunities. So my question is how to engage with local level organizations, and I'm focusing on people with disabilities, but it applies to all the marginalized groups, women's groups, all the marginalized groups, how to make sure that they have the capacity to engage in these processes. My obvious answer is make sure that you ask them in the beginning, what do you need? Do you need financial resources? Do you need technological resources? Do you need time? And then to give them what they require. Otherwise, it's going to continue that their input and the knowledge that they have is not going to be brought to the higher level. So that's my comment and question. I hope it was clear.
Thank you. Why don't we tackle this and other questions we can take? It's an excellent question, and it is true. sex, age, and disability disaggregated data remains a challenge for SFM reporting. It wasn't made mandatory in the negotiations of the Sendai framework. We have been pushing heavily for this, but it still remains a gap. So I would love to hear from our panelists on how we can help close that gap, and the whole question of engaging with these groups is so critical. I don't know, maybe we could start with Marcos. You seem to be doing a lot of work in this domain. What's working? What can we do better?
Yeah, definitely the example that I brought before about localizing climate projections, as I commented, it's not just about making sure that local organizations and communities, local groups are engaged in collecting that data. It's about making sure that we can work together. Local groups, local communities are engaged in designing solutions. We have another project called pretty easily locally led humanitarian solutions. Mm-hmm. It's about that. It's not just about making sure that this project is in 11 countries and more than 100 communities, but the idea is they, of course, participate through the views from the front line, the methodology that I commented before, collect that data. It's quality data about what you know, the impact or the risks that they are facing, but the process continues to design together with the local authorities solutions for that. There is a lot of advocacy job behind that, because we need to engage also local authorities in making sure that we can implement and those actions are sustainable. I mean, I do agree with you. I mean, it is really complicated, and we need to engage local groups, local communities from the very beginning. Make it work. Make it work. It is extremely difficult. I was, when thinking about this session, I was, a few weeks ago, I had a chance to participate on this policy forum on development, the European Union policy forum on development, and I had a chance to meet a member of GNDR from Fiji. And they've been very active in supporting the government in moving communities that have to be reallocated because the rising sea levels. We are talking about 40,000 people. Mm-hmm. It's about 800 communities. Only 6 already moved, and they only have 5 years. And they are our member there. They're working a lot with them, but it's extremely difficult because those communities, they feel, I mean, that they are, you know, they will lose the connection with the earth. They will lose the connection with their own, you know, with their own heritage and communities, you know, because, you know, they have this tradition of burying the umbilical cord in their own land, so they are connected with the land. So moving out is like, it's not an option for them. What I mean is like, it's not just collecting data, generating a solution, making that work has to be together, and that's really challenging.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, it's a tough issue. How do you actually measure non-economic losses from climate change, and just what does it mean actually, the types of losses that are not tangible but are so meaningful to so many populations? It's just, we didn't have time to go into, but I think it's a critical issue. Thank you for raising that issue of disaggregated data. We didn't really delve into it in this panel, but I think it's hugely important. We probably have time for one more question. I think I saw a hand up. Was that you, sir? Do you want to maybe give you the microphone? We only have a minute or two left, so.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie, and thanks to the panelists. I think some of my question was answered because I'm Eric from the Kingdom of Eswatini. And I think my question was somehow answered because I was thinking of the non-tangible and non-physical and economic losses. How do we address them? So which I think you are saying it's quite difficult, but maybe you can still also try to respond to that how do we cater for the physical and non-economic losses with the innovations, in the transparency and all that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that will probably be the last question we have. How do we get to terms with trying to understand, to measure these losses that are not easily quantifiable? Otto.
Yeah. The recipe for this, of course, is you have to know the knowledge. So what's behind these losses which are non-economic, and you have to talk with policy people to think in solutions maybe or whatever, and you might put data people together in a box, and they could think on this subject, and with you in the middle to ask this question, and then we could get information and knowledge from all sides, and someone should initiate this, of course, but then you could, everything is quantifiable. So.
Okay, excellent. Bert, any thoughts from the IMF perspective?
No, we're not doing that, but that doesn't mean it's not important. I can really see that point of view of the people being moved and how that affects them, and so yes, it's important to look into that. I mean, we are looking at the economy and the financial system. That's our role as IMF, but it does not mean that I do not think it's important.
Thank you. Any final thoughts?
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, and this is something that I can relate to. We've already experienced, as a result of sea level rise, a loss of culture with the extreme weather events, certain ethnic groups, some of their spiritual practices. That is at a loss now. You can no longer, in certain parts of the country, visit a loved one who has passed away because the graveyard is in the sea. So these are some real-life loss of culture that you wouldn't consider. You know, how do we quantify that? Okay. That emotional loss. How do we truly quantify emotional loss? It is something that is dire, but it is, as my colleague from the IMF mentioned, it is something that we definitely need to take into consideration, the implications of that as a result, as if not, because it is not necessarily something tangible that we need to measure, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is important and we need to take it into consideration.
Thank you. And Marcos, a final word for you. I think.
No, I mean just to make sure on that exercise, from my perspective and experience, the only way is engaging and listening to the communities. And I know that it is not an easy task. Nobody said that this was easy, but as Otto said, I mean, everything is quantifiable. So we need to do it. We need to assume that challenge. And I do believe that it has to start from the people, from the local communities, to make sure that we don't impose any measure and any action.
Thank you very much. And I think it's interesting that we really landed on a challenge to us all for the future. How do we actually measure the full impact of climate change? So thank you. We have run out of time. I really would like to thank our partners, the UNECE, UNU, UNOPS, ICAT, and of course my own team at UNDRR. I would like to let you know that all of the presentations are available to this event, going on the side event schedule at the COP.